Welcome to Chico, California Steak Life Sketches podcast. Today we are visiting with Michelle Romano. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks.
We're glad that you join us and share your story with us. At this point in our story, normally I ask about your early childhood and growing up years, but we're going to do something a little bit different. Michelle created a slideshow that covered from the time her parents met and through the years. Mm-hmm. And we are going to use a portion of this slideshow for her early years. Now, Michelle she composed the music for the background and wrote the lyrics to the music. And Michelle asked me to introduce this for this segment.
All it took was one look at the Harkin Dairy Freeze.
And a question, if you please, about some bullets.
We'll flip, oh dear, 50 years. There's been laughter and some tears.
But language ulcers that appeared,
biting bullets. And 22 more joined on in. There are cute-faced grandchildren. Families never stop growing, sweating bullets.
Cute little David Scott,
And Twyla Tempest, then we've got old Tiff and Sheller Beller with poor Chris down in the cellar. Then there's Kimberly and GD. Together we're a family for time and all eternity. The good, bad, and the ugly. Utah, then Arizona, California, and Australia. Move from Renton down to Denton, settle down in good old Hurricane.
birthday cards, $2 bills.
We won the yard of the year, canning peaches in glass jars, blowing stone.
Migraine headaches, Advil, Coke, bubble baths on Brazil brew. Half a half is how we cope.
Going fishing.
Where's my purse and keys and eyes? Do my hair for party time. Juicy news on the grapevine.
Going hunting.
Say whiskey,
Take that pick, the family's pressed. We've made our beds, our teeth are flossed, our hair is combed. We've even wiped our snotty noses. Popcorn on Friday nights, you're feeling down, you'll be alright. Sing love at home whenever we fight.
church road shows and Fisher pies. Sneaky snake did some sneaking. Hokey pokey clipping coupons.
Answer phones, yes, hello, Isons. Hush your mouth, that shoving, loving, pulling teeth.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, for sharing that slideshow with us. It really is a cute slideshow that you've put together over the years, showing your family and your talents too. So thank you.
Yeah.
So let's just go on to your college years. Tell us where you went to college, what you studied, and that story.
Kind of that. So I graduated high school in Denton, Texas, and I went to BYU in 1988, and I was trying to decide between 3 majors, and I ended up going with art education. And so my freshman year, I took art classes. I got accepted into the art program, and I loved my freshman year at BYU. It was a blast. But I was not so happy with my art classes. The overall theory that was being taught was just more abstract. And that was just not how my mind worked. I appreciated it. I like it, but I just really struggled with abstract art. And my freshman year, my family moved from Denton, Texas to Hurricane, Utah, back to where my parents had grown up. And so the summer after my freshman year, I went to Hurricane and stayed there. And I was talking to my dad about my frustration with the art program at BYU. And he advised that I think about doing architecture. And initially, I just laughed. I thought that was so preposterous. I felt architects were brilliant people, and that was absolutely not me. But my sophomore year, so the next year, I went back to BYU, and I took one of my electives I took in the construction management college, and I took a drafting class, and we designed a house, and our professor took us through all the different floor plans, elevations, sections. We produced an entire set of working drawings to build a house that we had designed. And I absolutely loved that class. I was in love. I was just like, this is what I want to do. And so I don't think it was coincidence, but as a student, I worked as a secretary in the planning department at BYU. So I was surrounded by architects. And so at this time, I counseled with them, and they helped me to know what to do, switching to architecture as a major, because BYU did not offer it. And so they helped me know what schools were good and where they had went, and I was just surrounded by wonderful men that helped me through the process, helped me know where to apply and how to apply, and putting portfolios together. And so I really felt like the Lord guided me to my eventual career. And so I ended up getting accepted at Arizona State University. And at the time, Matt Romano and I were dating. And so it was his last year at BYU. And he was graduating, so he was interviewing for jobs, and I was trying to find, I think by then I had been accepted to Arizona State. And so I think when he was interviewing, he had a list of schools that I was looking into, but as fate would have it, he found a job in Arizona, and I got accepted there, and so down we went. We got married the day after his graduation.
And where were you married?
In the St. George, Utah temple, which is where my parents were married, and it's where my roots are from. I was born there but never lived there. But it's where my extended family, and it's where my mom grew up. So from there, we took our honeymoon up the coast of California camping, and we ended up in Orland, where Matt's from, and had a little open house in his parents' backyard. And then we drove to Arizona and started our lives there. I had 3 years of undergraduate school there, so and Matt worked to put me through school. And then he decided to go back to school and get a law degree. And so we started grad school together. And about halfway through that first year, I found out I was expecting, and I was devastated. We were not planning on that. But the timing, God's timing is so much better than ours. It ended up working out great. And we had our little baby boy, our first son, in May 1994, and I had one more year of school. And that year, we had found a lot that we bought with another young student couple, and I designed and we built a duplex with them. And I remember we had our little boy, and we hadn't moved into this duplex yet, but we were building it still. And I remember just having him there. I'd be nursing in a back room, and Matt would be framing the door. And so I think within a month of having him, we were able to move in. And it was just a few blocks away from the campus. And that my final year, we worked out our schedule so that one of us was always home with our little baby. And we would stroll him onto campus and stroll him off, and sometimes two ships passing. And our son spent a lot of time in my architectural studio, and he was our little mascot. There were 12 people in our master studio, 20 total, but we had 2 separate studios. And so there were 10 to 12 per studio, and that's where we spent a lot of our time doing projects and such. So I graduated in 1995 with a master's in architecture, and Matt graduated the following year with his law degree at ASU.
And then you worked for a while.
And then, yes, when I finished, I went to work at the firm I had been working at part-time, Orcutt Winslow in Phoenix, Arizona. They did medical and educational facilities primarily. And as I was a student, I worked a lot on the schools, and they did even projects on the Arizona State campus. And when I graduated, they assigned me to the medical teams. And I helped an architect finish the Arizona Medical Center, which was like a huge rehab center. Had like an indoor pool, an indoor shopping mall kind of thing. It was huge. We finished that, and then they put me as a solo architect to design an Alzheimer's facility. And the client, they flew me back east to look at some facilities, and I studied them, did research, and I came back and designed. It's in Tempe, Arizona, but it's an Alzheimer's facility. And just before we began construction on that, Matt graduated from law school. He was really struggling to find a job because I don't think his heart was really in actually practicing law. He wanted to be a father first and foremost, and he felt law would take him away from his family too much. So, I mean, he interviewed a lot, but he ended up being the stay-at-home dad while I practiced, and I was very happy with that. I was totally happy with that arrangement. But I knew, the time would come, and it did. And he got a job in Boston working for an insurance agency. And our thought was we would go there for a couple years and enjoy the New England and then come back west. But the Lord had other plans for us. We ended up in Boston 25 years. And so it was a bittersweet move in that I knew it would be the end of my career. I knew it was time to stay home, and we'd already started a family, but to continue with the family and to raise them and be a full-time mother. And it was a very painful time for me when we moved. I missed my family. I missed my friends. I missed knowing how to get around. Boston is not an easy place to drive in, and it was at a time where I felt 100% loss of who I was and my identity. I'd worked so hard and spent so much money getting an education and absolutely loving what I did, and I felt I was good at it. It's a talent and gift God has given me, and it was very, very hard. I grieved for years over that loss. I still did some practice, just on the side a little bit for people here and there. I did some houses and some other little things. I even had a friend in Mesa asked me to design a neighborhood next to the Mesa Temple. The church was looking to improve the neighborhood around it. for temple workers. And so I designed a little neighborhood for them. I really don't know what became of it. I designed it, but so I was still able to dabble in it a little bit, but it was time to be home, and I think the move was just very startling. It was just a lot of change at once. So Matt started his career, and I stayed home. We moved to Boston. We had a little car, and just began our lives there with our little son. He was 2.5 at the time, and so.
Tell us about your other children that came along.
They came.
Uh-huh.
So at the end of that year, after we moved, we had our second child, Kylie. She was just a little cute little dimple-faced little baby girl. To be honest, I wanted 5 boys. That was my dream family, and I had a girl, and I'm like, that's okay. Matt can have his little girl. And at that time, his company wanted him to transfer to the Georgia offices. And so we moved to Georgia after having been in Boston a 1.5 years. And we were there 2 months and moved back. He got another job with another company weeks after we had moved. And I don't understand why the Lord moved us to Georgia and back until I said, if we go back, I want to be able to buy a house. And I knew how expensive they were. And so we found, I did the math, and I'm like, you'd have to make this much more money to be able to do this. And I mean, this is bare bones, tiny house, but that was the exact amount they offered Matt. And so we headed back. We were in Georgia literally 2 months. So we headed back, and we found a little house. And in that house, we had our third child, little Jade. And she's such a fun kid. Oh, I love little Jade. I mean, they're all just a blast. They've been great. So Jade, what's interesting is to kind of fill that hole I felt with architecture, I began woodworking, and I learned how to use woodworking tools when I was in college. The whole basement of the architecture building was a huge wood shop. Wood, metal, plastics. I learned how to use all the equipment. And I borrowed a lot of friends' shops in their garages when I was in Boston. And so I just kind of picked up woodworking. I had built a rocking chair at ASU. When I found out I was pregnant, I wanted to have a rocking chair for my little baby. And I really enjoyed woodworking. And so I built an entertainment center, and I remember after our daughter Jade was born, I was picking up toys and putting away stuff in this entertainment center, and I came across my old portfolios, which were shoved in the back of this bottom cabinet, and I started thumbing through them. I remember I was just sitting on the floor, and I was thumbing through them, and this was probably 5 years after we had moved. And all that grief just swelled up in me again. It was just, again, this, I shouldn't have looked, but it was just a reminder of what I had given up to pick up toys all day and change diapers. And, it was just this great sorrow and loss. And I had this profound experience where the voice of the Lord came to me and said, "Do not be as Lot's wife." And it was a chastisement, very loud, very clear, very simple. And in that moment, I promised the Lord I would stop looking back. I would stop grieving over practicing architecture and being able to design and build buildings. And I turned my heart to my family 100%. And my life became building my family instead of building buildings. And it's been worth it. It was, to me, that was my altar of sacrifice for my family. But even now, as you can tell, it's still a very tender, painful sacrifice. I miss it terribly. Sometimes I wish I would have never had it, because it's harder to have had something and lost it than just to have never had it. But I believe it gave me skills and talents and things that I was able to help my family with. And so after Jade, our daughter Sage was born, and these are all about 2 years apart. And Sage she's just our little general, but she has got the greatest sense of humor of anyone I've ever met. She's just a delight. And then about 2 years after that, we had Scott. So for wanting 5 kids that were all boys, I got 2 boys and a girl, and it's been great, though. They are just so much fun, and I don't know what I'd do without my daughters. I don't know why I didn't want them, because they are wonderful. And so we had 5 kids, and just after we had Scott, our youngest, I think he was literally weeks old, Matt's company wanted him to move to New York. They wanted to promote him, and New York was, if you're at the top of your game. And I did not want to move to New York. I had no interest. I did not want to raise a large family in New York. It was already hard enough raising one in Boston. But we went down and looked at houses, and both times we went down, I was just sick about it. Just absolutely sick about having to go to New York. And I pled with the Lord to not that we didn't have to go. And I remember my little boy Scott was just infant, and I stayed home one day because I was very sick. And I just pled with the Lord to not have to go. And very resounding, you are to move to New York. I'm like, okay. And so got the house ready to put on the market, and, took 2 or 3 weeks, but just all those little projects you never get done in your house, we always finish when it's time to sell it. And I remember this particular day, I was in the backyard mowing the lawn, and I'd put the mower away, and the next day we were going to put it on the market. And Matt came home from work, and he said, well, we're not moving. And they had retracted the offer, said it was going to cost too much to move our family for some reason, but whatever it was this huge, huge sigh of relief. I was so grateful that we didn't have to move to New York. But the next year, he got a job offer in North Carolina. And we ended up taking it, and our house was already ready to go, and everything went very smoothly. Moved to North Carolina. We were there 3 months, and he's like, it's not working out. The job's not working out. And so we moved back to Boston. So twice we left, twice we went back. And we were kind of the joke of the ward, because the elders quorum, we put them through their paces. But we lived a total of 25 years in Boston. And the last 3 years we were there, we took on foster kids. So our last 2 kids would have been our little Anna and Junior. They were 3 when we got them, and we had them for 2 years, and then part-time for another year. And it was very hard to say goodbye to them when we moved. It was very, very hard. But moving here has been the right thing for us.
So what brought you to Orland?
So in the year 2020, as we all know, COVID, everything shut down. We actually had 2 daughters get married during that time. Our oldest son had already gotten married. And so because of COVID, everything in Boston was shut down. We had a daughter get married in Utah and one get married in Idaho, which were a little more open to be able to gather a little bit. And in both of those weddings that summer, my husband Matt came back to Orland to see his mom and help and drive her to these weddings. And the first one was in Cedar City, Utah. It's where my sisters live. And we had the reception in the backyard, and we were the only ceiling in the Cedar City temple that day. It's kind of nice to have that little, you're the only ones. But while we were there, we were talking about moving. Our youngest son was then a senior in high school, and by then Matt was working from home, and all of his cases he worked a national practice. So his cases weren't just Boston specific or New England specific. They were now nationwide. And so we could live anywhere. We weren't attached to any specific place or office. So we were entertaining the idea of moving back west finally. And but after our son graduated. And so Matt's mom got wind of this, and the next wedding, which was 6 weeks later in Idaho, Matt again flew to Orland, picked up his mom, drove her to Idaho. And at this time, she said, I'm 80. She's now, I think, 10 years widowed. Matt lost his dad about 10 years ago to cancer. And she had a 50-acre olive orchard. And just said, if you guys are really serious about leaving Boston, I could use some help. And she lives by herself. At the time, she lived on the ranch by herself. I think COVID was very, very difficult for her, isolating. She's already isolated, but we came back the end of that summer with a big decision to make, and I really wanted to move to Cedar City and be with my family in southern Utah and our kids who were in Idaho and Utah, most of them going to school. And but we prayed about it, and we looked at homes out here that Thanksgiving, and in the end, I knew this was the right decision. I knew we needed to be here for his mother. Whether it was the ranch or not, I knew this was our duty. It was our responsibility. It's where we need to be. So that's what brought us, for my husband, back to Orland. For me, it's new, but
we're glad you're
came.
here. So through the years, you have created some really beautiful and meaningful pieces of artwork. Tell us about these pieces.
Okay, so I'd say, I've talked about, hanging up the architecture. And I'd say maybe 10 years ago, I thought, I probably will never practice architecture again on an official basis. But I can do art. It's something I can do and still have a family and still feel fulfilled in that creative capacity. I had done a lot of woodworking, love the tools, love power tools. I love my way around, by then I had my own little wood shop in my garage. And that Christmas when Matt gifted me with the table saw, oh, the tears. I just have my own table saw in my own garage. And so I began accumulating stuff to just begin painting. I'm like, I haven't painted since high school, and I would love to it's something my soul needs is to do art, whatever it is, just to be creative, whether it's woodworking or art or architecture. It's design. I love it. And so I started painting, and in that same year, we got our foster twins. I ended up homeschooling my youngest son that 1 year of school because of problems he was having at school. And I was called to be Relief Society president. And so it was sort of this triple whammy. And then that was also the year my husband Matt came home and started working from home. So I went from having sort of time during the day, my own little routine, to having a house full of people all day, every day, and then also responsibilities with my calling. And after about a year of this, I lost it. I was just so buried and overwhelmed and burdened by trying to be everything to everybody, and just having so many people needing me in my time. About a year before this, I had started painting, and there was a painting that sat on my easel that whole year unfinished. And I remember this particular morning, woke up, I think Matt had taken the kids to either their soccer games, or for whatever reason, everybody was gone. Which was unheard of in my life at the time. And I was looking at that painting, unfinished, and it tormented me, and I let it get to me, and I prayed to God about what was going on in my life and why I didn't even have a minute to put one brush stroke on that painting. And I fell apart. I thought, you've already taken architecture from me. And now I knew he was asking to take art from me. And I'm like, I can't give up another thing. I can't. I mean, I love my family. I love my kids. I love my ward and my ward family. Back east, your ward family is just your family, because nobody has family there. Your ward is your family, and I love these foster kids. But it was too much to ask. I felt that I couldn't express myself and express my creativity, and I would say I had a wrestle with God. And that whole morning, I wrestled with this. What am I willing to give up? What does God want me to do? What is His will versus my will? And in the end, I guess you could say I let Him prevail. But it was not pretty. I wish I could say I accepted it with grace and and joy. It was not pretty. I wept and I wailed and probably gnashed some teeth. But in that moment, for about 2 hours, I completely cleared my life. I took everything off my walls that I had made. I'd got rid of all my art books, all my architecture books. I got rid of my paint, my easel. I either threw things away, I donated things, or I tucked things in a way that I tucked things so deep it would be very hard to unbury them. And I erased myself, I guess, in so many words. And I promised the Lord, I covenanted with Him, or it wasn't a covenant, but I just said, okay, I'm yours. I'm here to do whatever you need me to do. I've gotten rid of myself and who I am and what I love to do, and I'll just do what you ask me to do. And so, the kids come home and they want dinner. Life goes on, right? And it's for 6 months. I felt I was okay, but hurting, empty. And then my sister texted me about 6 months later and said, the church does this international art competition. I think you should enter it. And I'm like, no way. These are professional artists, people that do it their whole lives. And she said, well, you do woodworking. It would be something different, because most of the stuff there is painting. And anyway, I told her I couldn't, because in the back of my mind, I'm like, I've made a promise to God that I would not do this anymore. I wouldn't let it get in the way of what He needs me to really do. But as a creative person, I can't help myself. My brain just switched on, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I just felt compelled to do it. And in the end, I made some promises with God that if I were to do this, I would only work on it 20 minutes a day. I wouldn't worry about the deadline. And if my kids needed me, even if I was working on it, I would put it down and attend to their needs. Or if somebody from the board needed me, same thing. And so I began. I began very timidly because I felt like I was already going back on my promise within 6 months. But I felt the permission from God to go ahead. And so I did this wood piece using what's called wood marquetry, which means you take different kinds of veneer of all sorts of different woods and their textures and colors and patterns and grain, and you make a picture out of it. And so I ended up just doing the doorknob of the Salt Lake Temple. And I made a clock of it, and I entered it. I finished it in time. It was miraculous. I couldn't believe I could do something in 4 months that turned out, I felt it was beautiful. It was not stressful. It didn't take up any time, hardly at all. And that I was able to do it. And so...
And it is beautiful.
Thank you. So I used 3 woods, purple heart, maple, and one gay, which are dark wood, a white wood, and a purple wood. And then I veneered, I sort of routed out and veneered the doorknob. And it made it in, and I was stunned, but in the same time I wasn't, because I just felt the Lord's hand in the whole process. I knew He wanted this for me, and to me it was like, it was a gift from God, saying, it's okay, my little drama queen, you can do this. I'm not asking you to give everything up. There's just times and seasons for things. And so the church does this competition every 3 years. And the next one came around. Within about a year of the clock, we found out the theme. Each one has a theme. We found out the theme for the next one. And the next theme was, all are alike unto God. And I read the scripture that goes with it, and it's I'm going to paraphrase it, but it basically says that that all are invited to come unto God, both male and female, black and white, Jew and Gentile, for all are alike unto God. And so initially I was going to do the tree of life. I'm like, that is the invitation. That is the open invitation to all. So I'd spent a couple months designing this tree, using wood marquetry, using these types of wood. And I remember one morning, one morning I woke up thinking about it, because that's what happens when these projects begin. A switch is on and I can't stop thinking about it. And I thought, one way that we really are all alike unto God is in our potential and in how He sees us as kings and queens and wants to see us crowned and in thrones as His children. I said, that's how we're all alike. It's our potential. And in that moment, I realized this piece needed to be a throne. That is how we're all alike. And so, of course, I'm like, now I got to build a piece of furniture. It's not just a panel. And this project became very big and complicated all of a sudden. Within a month, though, as I was designing the throne, this phrase came to my head, because I'm thinking about how to do the crown. And I decided to incorporate it into the back of the chair. So when you're sitting in the chair, you kind of have this crown above you. But this phrase came into my mind, and I'm going to back up a year. Most people don't know this. Actually, nobody knows this, but I submitted 5 songs for the church hymn book. I wrote 5 hymns and 5 primary songs, which is the maximum we were allowed. And that's a whole other experience. And it was just a very sacred experience for me. But one of the songs I wrote was about the Savior's second coming. And it's titled, it's from the perspective of the messenger. And it's titled, He is Coming. He is Coming. And one of the phrases that came to my mind in writing that song was, all are crowned in Israel's gems. And when I'm designing and thinking about this crown for the throne, that phrase came, that lyric came back to my mind. All are crowned in Israel's gems. And I thought that's what that crown needs to be. It needs to have Israel's, the 12 tribes of Israel's gemstones in it. And so I spent the next year researching what these gemstones were and the 12 tribes. And so this throne really became a symbol of Israel and all the tribes and all the people, and how we all have something to offer and something to give. And so the gemstones are in there. I feel like I finally figured out what the 12 were. And the arms and legs of the chair, I remember thinking, I'm going to take all of my wood veneers. I mean, there's probably several hundred different kinds. And I'm going to put them all on there and put a hole in each one of them and put a little white. Originally, I was going to do mother of pearl, but I ended up just doing a pearlescent paint, just to show that, like, no matter what we look like and how we are and who we are, we all have the light of Christ within us. We are all born with that light of Christ. And so, again, this symbol of how we are all alike unto God is we're all his children. We all have his light in us. And I was going to randomly scatter them up and down the legs. But when I went to begin, the thought came to my mind, start dark and go light. And so that's what I did. Sort of this ombre thing. And when I taped it all together, I'm like, yeah, I felt it was a very beautiful look. But each one of those has its little white dot inside it. And the back panel is the tree of life. And the seat is the Garden of Eden with the tree of life in the middle. So it's like a floor plan, I guess. Just the architect coming out in me. And the skirt of the chair are the tribes of Israel gemstones as they encamped around the tabernacle in the desert. They each had a direction they faced. And so I learned so much doing that chair about the tribes and the purposes of each tribe. And it was a beautiful, sacred experience. It got into the show, and it won a merit award, which was fun. Mm-hmm. And so that was that piece. Do you have any other questions about it?
Was there any other artwork you wanted to talk about? But the throne is beautiful and so meaningful, and such deep thought and meaning behind every part of it. I love it.
Well, thank you. Yeah. The whole purpose of that throne was to have people sit in it. I loved seeing my friends and family. Just before the day we moved, the throne was the last thing I shrink wrapped and put on the truck. And as friends came to say goodbye, I'd have them sit in the throne and I'd take a picture. And it was a beautiful farewell. But I love seeing how people feel when they sit in that throne. And I'm like, this is what God wants for us. It's that feeling of royalty and importance, and that you're somebody. Mm-hmm. And everybody wants to be a somebody, and I felt the throne really, I'd asked the museum to have it be open to people sitting in and taking pictures, and legality, they're like, we want to do it, but we can't. So it was blocked off. But you can come to my house and sit in it and take your pictures.
Yes, and we have been there and seen it. Thank you. Were there other art pieces that you wanted to talk about?
So I did another piece this year. The theme this year for this would have been my third attempt at the LDS art competition. I ended up doing, I'm trying to think right now what the theme was.
Hands down
Lift up the hands
lift
that
up
hang
the
down.
hands.
It's a theme about service and charity, I felt. And so last summer, or a summer ago, the thought came to my mind to do an obelisk, an Egyptian obelisk. I don't know why. I couldn't figure it out. But I knew that's what it was to be. And so, of course, naturally, you go to Egypt, right, to study obelisks, which is what we did about a year ago. We went to Egypt. So I could study obelisks and just see if there's anything that I could glean from that culture and those people, because I still didn't know why it had to be an obelisk, but I knew that's what it was to be. So we went to Egypt. I saw a lot of obelisks. We actually went to Italy for Christmas, which the Romans took a lot of the obelisks from Egypt. So I got to see probably more obelisks in Rome than in Egypt. It was a magical experience. I learned more about temples in Egypt than I think I have my entire life, going to them and thinking about them and reading about them in the scriptures. Egypt has a lot of temples, and a lot of their hieroglyphs and symbols are temple ceremonies and covenants and signs and symbols, and it's everywhere. I mean, I was just blown away. So for that experience alone, I'm so grateful for that opportunity. But we got home, and I had like creative block. I had built the obelisk. I knew, I had the size, I had it built, but now I had to veneer it. And at this point in time, I had since gone to San Diego twice to take a professional course on how it's called the French technique of wood marquetry, to really actually do it properly. Before then, I'd made it up. I didn't know what I was doing. But I'd since learned that there's a proper way to do it, that it's an actual craft and art. Mm-hmm. So I took a class on how to do it. Mm-hmm. And Matt for Christmas got me the tool. It's called a chevalet, where you can actually properly do wood marquetry. And I'm grateful I had that tool to do the obelisk, because for December, January, February last year, I had no idea what I was going to. I had fiddled with 1,000 different scenarios as to what I wanted to veneer this obelisk with, and nothing was coming. At the end of February, I had this moment, and it was that the obelisk needed to be blue, which I've never dyed wood. I don't believe in it. I believe in using the natural colors, and that it needed to have brass, and it needed to all be in hieroglyphs. And it was like a 1 second flash of what it looked like, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I've never worked with dyed wood. I've never worked with brass. I know nothing of hieroglyphs. So I took the whole month of March and studied my brains out. And in the end, the obelisk became a symbol of lifting up the hands that hang down. So one whole side in hieroglyphs is how we lift each other in our families. And one whole side is the hieroglyphs symbolizing how God lifts us through our ordinances. It's the covenant path in hieroglyphs. Another side is how we lift our ancestors through temple and family history work. Those two sides, they're opposite of each other, but they're very similar because they're both covenant paths, just one's for ourselves and one is for our ancestors. And the final side is, it's the scripture that talks about, when I was hungry, you gave me meat, and when I was thirsty, you gave me drink. Naked and you clothed me. It's all these things we do for our friends and strangers to help lift each other to God. And I spent 2 months full-time. I know you came to see me a few times. Veneering this and using brass. It took me a long time to figure the right thickness of brass, and I was making it up as I went along, but I was so grateful for my Chevrolet because that little tiny blade can cut brass. And I was using an X-Acto knife on the throne and on the clock, and this time I had a tool that used a little blade. And so I finished it just in time, turned it in, and when you first submit something to the Church History Museum Art Show, you just do it online. And then they decide if they want it, and then by the end of August, you need to have it there in person, and then they do another judging. And so there's this series of judging. I found out in July that the obelisk did not make it. It did not make the first cut. And I was shocked because I had had this experience with the Lord in doing it, that throughout the spring we'd had a lot of company and I didn't have time to work on it. And again, it's this inner turmoil I have with, family comes first, always. But I really felt compelled to do this piece. And I remember it was the end of end of March. I was taking my parents back to the airport. They'd come for a visit, and I was crying on the way home because I thought, I have 6 weeks and there's no way. I've had constant family and friends, and which is wonderful, but I'm like, there's no way I can do this in 6 weeks. And I bawled my eyes out on the way home, the drama queen as usual. And the Lord, again, came to me in a voice, and it's the hymn, "Fear not, I am with thee, O be not dismayed. For I am thy God, and I will give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand." And in that moment, I was like, that's this whole theme. This whole theme is about lifting. And in that moment, God's like, I'm going to see you through this. And he did. I got it done. It was a miracle. I don't know how. And a week before I were to finish it, I went to put the finish on it. And again, I've never worked with dyed wood. And I put the finish on it, and all the dye bled. It interacted chemically in a very negative way. And I just broke down. I'm like, I don't know what else to do. I don't know what I'm doing. But I had a friend save me. He's a auto body guy. He goes, we're going to put a clear coat of auto clear coat on that, and it'll be fine. I cleaned it all up, and the day before it was due, he clear coated it, and it turned out beautiful. It worked. But it did not get in. And so my sister, who's always my helper, just said, Springville, Utah does a religious art show every fall. You should enter it into there. And so I did, and it's made it in. And so that's the throne and its footstool and the obelisk are right now in the Springville Art Museum in Utah. And what was interesting with the obelisk, when I was submitting the piece, and they want a little artist statement. And of course, the theme, lift up the hands that hang down, didn't really apply anymore. And I really thought about what that piece was about and why it was an obelisk. And I could go into a whole thing about what the meaning of an obelisk is to the Egyptians. But it's basically a needle that stitches man on earth to God in heaven. And it's symbolic of a sunbeam that reaches from the heaven down to earth. And so there's this whole idea of stitching, how we stitch ourselves back to God. And when I was writing this artist statement, I realized that this obelisk is in every way symbolic of the Savior. He is that needle. He is the being that stitches us back to God. And it's only through the ordinances and his atonement that we are stitched back to God. And every little hieroglyph that I cut out in brass, that's how the Savior operates. It's one at a time, one-on-one, one by one. And it seems so inefficient, but it's God's way, and it's so personal. And I think it took me a year of this whole process to realize why an obelisk and why it had to have those hieroglyphs and what the whole meaning was. That obelisk is a pure symbol of the Savior in every way.
You're a deep thinker and a creative talent to express it. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Well, we've talked about several things. Is there any last-minute words that you'd like to share or something you'd like to share with our viewers?
I think probably in closing, I know my life has, just like everybody, has experienced sorrow and loss and grief and confusion. Sometimes the way God does things and the directions he leads us can be very confusing and frustrating. But I know his plan is the best. And I have lived probably one of the greatest lives that has ever been lived on this earth. Mm-hmm. He has blessed me in so many ways. I can't imagine not having my family. I was blessed into a wonderful family. I was born into this great, loving family. We all get along. We love each other. We support each other. I love my kids and their growing families. Probably one of my greatest heartbreaks is I've never been allowed to live near my family. Growing up, our family moved a lot. We never lived near family. Raising my kids, we never were around family. And now my kids have grown and I've moved on, and we've moved to a place that, again, I'm not near my family. And that's very hard for me. But I feel in some ways because of that has led me to become a huge family historian, because I long for that so much in my life. But I am grateful for the friends I have made, such as you, and just so many people throughout my life, the cultures I've been able to experience, and the people. People are incredible. They're wonderful, and they all have a story to tell. There's not a soul that walks this earth that doesn't have a story to tell. And I'm grateful for this little chance to tell mine. And I am one of the most blessed individuals on this earth. That's how I feel. God has given me everything he has to give his children. And I'm so grateful for it. My only hope is that I don't waste it, that I use it for good, and I use it for his purposes.
Thank you, Michelle. I feel honored to have been able to sit in here with you and hear about all of these things from your life, and as you've shared your heart with all of our viewers. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ruth.